Maria Dios, and I serve the Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry as Director of Continuing Education. Thank you so much for being here. We know this is a lunch event, so please feel free to keep eating, drinking, getting up to get more refreshments. We're so happy to have you here with us, both in person and our live stream. Thank you for joining us online. We're so happy to have you here for our annual PYNE Memorial presentation on ministry with persons with disabilities. This is our first lecture in our fall 2024 series, so thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about our continuing education programming that's upcoming, and then we're going to dive right into our lecture today. Our next several CSTM online Crossroads courses begin October 2nd, and we're going to highlight two. Ignatian Spirituality. This course explores the pillars of Ignatian spirituality, including the spiritual exercises, prayer, contemplation, the examen, and discernment. And we have a new course, The Gift of Prayer. Rooted in the Catholic tradition, this course explores the foundations of prayer and reflects on different ways to engage in prayer communally and individually. More information about these courses can be found at the entrance of the room. We hope that you can join us. As part of the school's mission, we offer an array of enrichment opportunities to foster Christian faith and to promote lifelong learning. We do this by offering presentations such as this one, as well as online courses, videos, and other resources for personal enrichment and professional development. Our fall lecture series, where you can find all the lectures that we're offering this semester, is also on the entrance table when you entered the room. You can register by visiting bc.edu/CSTMReg. I'm going to highlight two that are coming up. On Thursday, October 3rd, Catholic writer Jeffrey Odell Corrigan, president of Corrigan Associates, will join us for Dorothy Day, a Saint for Our Time. And on Thursday, October 10th, Father Sam Sawyer will join us for From Polarization to Communion, and that one will be in the same room. So please stop by the table on your way out to grab the list of our lectures. Thank you to our speaker, Tom Murphy, for granting us permission to record today's event. As soon as the recording of today's presentation is available for viewing, likely in about a month, we will notify all registered participants of the availability of the recording. We have bookmarks at the front of the room that has information on where you can find it. Speaking of bookmarks, please visit the BC bookstore, which is just opposite from our registration table. They're selling the book that Tom recommended, I Believe in You, Wisdom from Community with Persons with Disabilities on Believing in Ourselves and Others. So please visit the bookstore to check out the book. At the end of the program, there's going to be an opportunity for conversation and Q&A, and there are two things to keep in mind. First, before you ask a question, please raise your hand and one of our team members will come with a microphone and make sure that everyone in the room can hear it as well as our online audience. So thank you for your patience before speaking. And as I mentioned, we are recording this event, so just be sure that you're comfortable in what you're going to say or ask before you do so, because it will likely be part of the recording. For those of us that are joining us online, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can click on that to enter a question or a comment, and then my colleagues, Brendan, will be able to ask your question at the end. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. Finally, for an online audience, we have live captioning enabled. You can enable or disable the feature by clicking on the CC button at the bottom. Many thanks to Brendan, Isa, Grace Ann, Francesca, and Luis, graduate students here at the CSTM, for supporting our program today. Now, for today's presentation. In 1991, the first PYNE lecture was held at Weston Jesuit School of Theology, the generous gift of Professor Margaret PYNE, and it continued here at Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry beginning in 2009. A lifelong advocate for persons with disabilities, Margaret PYNE served as Associate Dean of Special Education at Lesley College. She saw the need to educate theological students about ministry for and with persons with disabilities, and she felt so strongly about this that she donated this lecture series. We owe Professor PYNE a debt of gratitude for her vision and foresight. Her gift ensures that this topic is front and center on a regular basis for our programming for graduate students and for the public. We have two special guests joining us today, Ann Barry Goodfellow and Ruth Ann Rasbold. Ann is the trustee of the PYNE Endowment Trust, and both she and Ruth Ann were personal friends of Margaret PYNE. Please join me in thanking them for their presence today. I now invite Father Michael McCarthy, Dean of the Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry, to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this presentation from friends to allies, forming relationships between people with and without disabilities. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. Thomas Murphy is a PhD candidate here at the Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry, so he is one of our own. And he is a member of the national staff of L'Arche USA. He has been a part of the L'Arche movement for 22 years, sharing life and building friendships between people with and without intellectual disabilities at the local, national, and international level. Tom's research interests are at the intersection of Christian theology, spirituality, and disability studies, with particular interest in accessible curriculum design and pedagogical practices to ensure people with intellectual disabilities can contribute to the pursuit of theological knowledge and religious education. Tom's work is driven by a commitment to drawing the insights and resources of the Academy into dialogue with the wisdom of ministers and practitioners. Toward this end, he has presented and published in a variety of scholarly and ministry-based contexts. His work has addressed topics such as accessible and inclusive religious and theological education, collaborative academic research with people with intellectual disabilities, and the application of the values and practices of the communities of L'Arche more broadly within the Theological Academy, faith communities, and the nonprofit and healthcare sectors. His current work for L'Arche USA affords him the opportunity to apply his scholarly pursuits to co-creating leadership strategies and practices alongside colleagues with intellectual disabilities to help L'Arche become a disability-led movement. Tom was raised in Spencer, Massachusetts, where the Cistercian monks of St. Joseph's Abbey first kindled his interest in living and working within a Christian communal setting and helped set the stage early in his life for his eventual journey with L'Arche. We are delighted to have one of our own with us today here at the Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry, so please join me in welcoming Tom Murphy.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Dean McCarthy. And I'd like to start just by saying I'm just so happy to be here at another annual PYNE Memorial presentation, as it has been a real anchor for my work at L'Arche and as a PhD student. And I'll be building on some insights from past lectures, both implicitly and explicitly today. And it's wonderful to be gathered, wonderful to be gathered again with the teaching and learning community that is drawn each year to the PYNE lecture, a lecture that importantly shapes the commitments of Boston College and has a wide reach into the greater Boston community and beyond. And to have been invited to deliver this year's lecture is a real honor and joy for which I'm most grateful. And I'm well aware of the powerful lineage of this lecture, going back to 1991, and the incredible resource that Margaret E. PYNE left to us all. And to the trustees here who carry on that legacy, a very special thank you today. My heartfelt thanks as well to Megan DeDios and Kara O'Sullivan in the School of Theology and Ministry Continuing Education Office, who have both made the preparation for this lecture a very convenient endeavor. And thank you to Megan and Kara's colleagues in the Continuing Ed office and other departments here at Boston College who always ensure comfort and accessibility at these events. And to this teaching and learning community, again, one of my very favorites to gather here at Boston College and virtually each year, thank you for your attention and engagement. I have much to learn from all of you. And as part of our teaching and learning community this afternoon, we have a number of members of L'Arche, both the local Boston North community from Haverhill, Massachusetts, and from our national staff. And I'd like to very gratefully acknowledge their presence with us today, the real experts at living L'Arche day to day. You'll hear more about my friends in L'Arche throughout this lecture, but I wonder if those of you here from L'Arche today wouldn't mind making yourselves known. I'd just like to really say thank you to all of you for being here today. So please find these folks after the lecture or at your table if you'd like to learn more about L'Arche or plan for a visit to the very hospitable Boston North community. And before I get going, I want to take a moment to address a few brief but important preliminary points. First, a quick check on accessibility. If you're having any trouble hearing me or seeing the slides, I welcome you to move to a more advantageous place in the room. And as the lecture progresses, please feel very free to get up, move around as suits your bodily needs. My slides are very simply designed with a somewhat minimal amount of text, which I'll also read aloud as an accessibility practice. And I'll do my best to provide real-time image descriptions of the few photos that I'm going to use. And if I'm going too fast or you can't hear me, just flag me, and I'm very happy to adjust. My second preliminary point is that of my own positionality towards disability. I'm not someone who has been identified or self-identifies as disabled in any way. Simi Linton, a scholar who works at the intersection of disability justice and the arts, invites us all to think about our relationship to disability. When I do so, I note, of course, the many people with intellectual disabilities whom I number amongst my dearest friends from my years of living and working in the communities of L'Arche. I also note my scholarship, which puts me into relationship to disability through the ideas generated by disabled scholars and activists. And I'll return to all of this in a few minutes. But it's important at the start to note that I will be doing my best to foreground the perspective and insights of people with intellectual disabilities throughout this lecture, because I don't have that experience myself. And a final preliminary point is a brief content warning. I'm going to very briefly make a point about sexual abuse in a few minutes. It will be brief, and I will make it only once. 2024 marks the 30th anniversary of the publication of Nancy Easland's pioneering work, The Disabled God. Her image of God in a sit-puff wheelchair and her invocation of the resurrected Christ still bearing the disabling marks of crucifixion opened up new and liberatory theological space and imagination for the lives of people with disabilities. Easland also delivered the 8th annual PYNE Memorial Presentation in 1999. On that occasion, she asked her listeners if they were, quote, willing to risk understanding God more fully as you move towards full participation of people with disabilities in your midst and beyond. Will we together develop a risky theological imagination that asks, what is God's vision of human flourishing? Not just for some, but for all. Not just for the able-bodied, but the disabled. And not just for those in the Western world, but for the whole world, end quote. What I'm after today is not so far removed from Easland's question. I hope to prompt us to develop together our theological imagination for friendship between people with and without intellectual disabilities, something I've learned a great deal about from my friends in the communities of L'Arche. And to risk together a deeper understanding of God's sense of flourishing and justice for all, and how concrete actions that we take in our various communities can contribute to that. Do you find that risky? And if so, what is the risk in it for you? From friends to allies, from the title of my lecture, I intend it to invoke a directional movement. I intend it to give some shape and contour to what sorts of relationships I hope we can develop within our ministries, with people with disabilities, within our faith communities, and within our teaching and learning communities. Creating communities of deep and authentic belonging, communities that contribute to critiquing and dismantling ableist assumptions and practices, and communities that promote disability justice, all forms the telos, which I hope relationships and friendships between people with and without disabilities move us toward. I think the concept and the work of allyship can help move us towards some of those North Stars, so long as we take a deeper approach to it than how it is too often utilized as a buzzword. Towards these ends, I'm going to invite you all to consider some facets of friendship and belonging as found in the values and practices of the communities of L'Arche. I'm then going to try to deepen those values and practices from L'Arche by engaging with concepts from the literature and work done on allyship. And in all of this, I'll be speaking from my own backyard in L'Arche in hopes of offering something of value for your work and relationships. But I'm also speaking for my own backyard in L'Arche because we're learning and trying to get better at this work right alongside all of you. At present, there are nearly 160 L'Arche communities spread across 37 different countries and inclusive of a wide diversity of cultures, religions, and socioeconomic contexts. There are 21 in the United States, including, of course, my friends from the Boston North community, just north of here in Haverhill, Massachusetts. These communities are most often homes where people with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities live together, but also increasingly new ways of sharing life in workshops or community centers, apartment settings. And as noted on this slide, L'Arche's quote, "People with and without intellectual disabilities sharing life in communities belonging to an international federation." The mission of each of these communities, no matter their size or location, is to, quote, "make known the gifts of people with intellectual disabilities revealed through mutually transforming relationships," end quote. Or to put this all more succinctly, my friend Judy, who has been doing the work of community for many, many years in L'Arche, says that L'Arche means friends. She goes on to say, and I quote her here, "I belong here, I most certainly do. Everybody does here in this world." So transformational relationships and a deep sense of belonging form the very heart of L'Arche. Thank you for that insight, Judy. And my content warning here. Just unfortunately, when we talk about L'Arche today, it's also important to note the spiritualized psychosexual abuse perpetrated by the founder of L'Arche, Jean Vanier, over many years in the lives of multiple women, none of whom have been identified as having an intellectual disability. A study was initiated by L'Arche, though carried out by a commission completely independent of L'Arche, which published a 900-page report on the abuse in 2020. I hope this is not the first you're hearing about this, because I'm not going to go into it in any depth today. L'Arche has had to learn a lot about our founding story and the problematic parts of Vanier's life and theology and spirituality. We continue to learn from all of this and continue to live from and for that which is most truthful and life-giving in our work in L'Arche. I want to tell you a story. We do a lot of storytelling in L'Arche because it's a fun and accessible way to communicate deep truths and important things about our experiences together. And then we can unpack the story in a few minutes. I want to bring you into my first year of L'Arche, and particularly the very end of that first year, when I was trying to decide if I should stay for another year. I'd been living with two guys with intellectual disabilities in a small apartment, and several folks without disabilities lived in an adjacent apartment, which also doubled as our L'Arche office. We were a lot of people in a cramped space. I came into L'Arche with all kinds of misconceptions about what community life would look like. I had most recently been working at the Trappist monastery that Dean McCarthy noted in my introduction, and I had some sense of the ora et labora, the prayer and work that marked their communal Benedictine life. I think I expected something maybe at least a little similar in L'Arche. And to a degree, that's what I found. We had ora, prayer, some beautiful communal prayer, often around our kitchen table. but I certainly wasn't prepared for the sheer volume of labora. There were large communal meals to cook together, never-ending piles of dishes and laundry, constant appointments and house errands, the occasional conflict mediation. In short, all of the tasks of any busy communal household. And it led to some really long days. I was really tired by the end of my first year and uncertain about a second year. In all the indecision of the moment, though, there was also a lot to consider that I really loved about that year. First and foremost among those factors was one particular friendship that had developed. And that's with this guy right here. In this image, my dear friend Jim and I are sitting side by side with our arms around one another. I'm wearing a white shirt with a blue tie. Jim's wearing a blue shirt and a blue tie. We're at a table with some glasses and dishes at some sort of a fancy dinner event. What's of note here, perhaps, is that I have dark hair and a dark beard, and Jim has a dark mustache. We're a couple of young guys here. And Jim's here today, and Jim, I really appreciate that you're here, and thank you. Jim and I talking about our friendship a little, and Jim's okay with that, so thanks for that, Jimmy. This is a photograph from some time in that time period when I was trying to decide my future, or not, with L'Arche. The flash of clarity for me in this whole discernment was simply recognizing that the friendship I was developing with Jim was simply too valuable for me to leave. Jim had welcomed me to community as wholeheartedly and with arms as wide open as can be imagined. And he had immediately begun to dismantle any ableist relational hierarchies I might have brought with me. Jim was looking for friends, not caregivers, not guardians, certainly not anybody trying to pull a power trip on him. And a friend is exactly what he treated me as from day one. I was looking for friends too. And it might have taken me the better part of that year to come around to that realization, to let go of some of my do-gooder zealotry. I'm a slow learner. But Jim had insightfully been laying the groundwork for friendship and teaching me how to be a friend right from the beginning. And I've learned over the years that Jim is a masterful builder of friendships, which is attested to by a long roster of friends around the world. And here's another photograph. This is of us taken just a couple of months ago at a L'Arche gathering. In this image, we're taking a selfie, sitting side by side. Jim in a gray sweatshirt, me in a blue t-shirt with a blue lanyard around my neck and a baseball cap on my head. The thing to note here is that both Jim and I now have much lighter facial hair than that first image. You might even call it white. We've been friends a good long time now, Jim. And of course, in some ways, you already know the outcome of this story. Given that I'm still part of L'Arche, Jim is here today as the faithful and supportive friend that he's always been. Jim and my friendship is one example of what L'Arche calls its guiding insight, so named in the Charter of the Communities of L'Arche, and as presented here on this slide. The guiding insight of L'Arche is that mutual relationships among people with and without intellectual disabilities transform us by revealing the unique value of every person. This experience is a sign in the world that all belong. I know for certain that Jim helped me to realize some of my own unique value as a friend, as a human being created for relationship, created in the image of a very relational God, for which I'm forever grateful to Jim. I hope, too, that our friendship did the same for Jim. I know Jim is a guy who carries a good, strong sense of his own unique value, though, with or without my friendship. And I'm not going to stand up here and try to tell Jim's side of the story today, or speculate at all about the value of my friendship with Jim. To do so would be to usurp Jim's perspective and subjectivity in the story. And even in telling the story, I'm aware of the risk that one way to think about it is as a story that instrumentalizes Jim as the object of my personal insight and enlightenment, erasing his subjectivity and agency in the process. But I couldn't talk about friendships in L'Arche without sharing how much I've benefited from the insights and deep wisdom of Jim, and without foregrounding Jim's perspective on what it means to be in a mutual relationship and friendship. But let's not leave it at that. The story of my friendship with Jim turns on this notion here in the guiding insight of mutuality. Mutual relationships that are transformative. As Judy put it so well, community means friends, and the mutuality that's implied in friendship. All belong, again, echoing Judy. Everybody here in this world belongs, she says. L'Arche is friends, and L'Arche is belonging. Our value as humans is revealed within, and we are transformed by relationships of mutuality. The deep sense of belonging of L'Arche is situated precisely in the way it fosters mutuality and friendships across the wide and wonderful variability of abilities in our communities. The transformative discovery of human value is not dependent on ability or disability status, but is rather the foundational experience available to each and every member of L'Arche who is open to it. For Jim and I, our friendship is one of mutuality, collaboration, and co-creation. Not long after we shared that apartment, we went on to help open a brand new L'Arche home, to grow the community, to welcome many new people into L'Arche over the years. Jim's currently helping to grow an exciting culinary program at the Boston North community to provide training and meaningful jobs for people with intellectual disabilities. While L'Arche cannot be conflated with the church, and it contains a plurality of religious identities, this emphasis on mutuality nonetheless expands our theological imagination in how it suggests a lived expression of the Christian theological understanding of the fundamentally relational, perichoretic nature of God in the Trinity. The mutual indwelling of the three persons in the Trinity. Moral theologian Mary Jo Iozio, who I'm so grateful has joined us today, Mary Jo. Mary Jo centers and deepens this understanding of a relational Trinitarian imago Dei, the way that humans image God, as a dependent relational imago Dei. And she calls this a crucial aspect of Christian disability theology more broadly, noting how, quote, a loving and liberatory relationality that images the triune God and humankind belies the dualisms that artificially segregate one person from the main or one community from another. Rather than superficially observable physical, cognitive, emotional characteristics that seemingly divide people from one another, human anthropological diversity locates norms of being in relationships and communities that affirm human flourishing. End quote. When we live most fully into the mutual relationships and friendships of L'Arche, we are living into our fundamental human nature, created by a relational God for relationships in which all can flourish. The friendships developed in L'Arche have the capacity to completely shift one's operative concept of what it means to be a human, to be a friend. This is experienced, according to theologian Michael Aronek, as the revelation of one's capacity to give and receive love, and recognition that one's personhood is grounded in radical openness to relationship with one another. In this way, L'Arche becomes an embodiment of what a community formed in the interdependent relational image of God can look like. It is Judy's friendship and belonging again. The Charter of L'Arche helps orient us to a few of the values and practices of L'Arche where relational interdependence and mutuality are foregrounded. And it's worth noting here that we have the gift of a recently co-created charter to guide our community building work around the world. A final draft of it was completed in January of 2023. And when I call the charter co-created, I mean it was done over a 3-year process in which anyone and everyone in all 160 communities around the world had a chance to contribute and help revise the drafts and vote on the final version that I'll be drawing on today. It was a process that was designed with particular attention to accessibility to ensure that people with intellectual disabilities in our communities could participate fully and provide their input. It represents what we feel unites our communities around the world, and it reflects our daily life together, and it gives us a great guide for the values and practices of that daily life. So my use of the charter today is one more way that I'm trying to foreground the perspective and wisdom of people with intellectual disabilities from within L'Arche. The core values of L'Arche, as the charter lays them out, here in this more easy read format from the charter, represented on this slide. The core values of L'Arche are that every person is of equal value. We share life together. We pray together. We share what is important to us, and all are welcome. Again, these values express how L'Arche hopes to build communities wherein everyone can flourish, and these are rooted in the daily life and mutual relationships of L'Arche. And these core values also give rise to some of the core practices of L'Arche, also named in that charter. The core practices that most readily point to a commitment to interdependence and mutuality include that we create space to share life together, listening and being deeply present to each other in households, workplaces, and other forms of gathering. And relatedly, we make time to share meals, work routines, and activities with each other. And another, we make space for reflection, storytelling, welcome, ritual, and prayer. And one more, we mark and celebrate the events and the cycles of life. Whenever we're sharing the daily tasks of household or workplace, getting together for coffee or praying together, or going on vacation together, or simply sitting around the dinner table in L'Arche, it is all oriented towards the deep presence to one another. We're celebrating who are you, who am I in this moment that we're sharing. Another core practice of L'Arche is that together we exercise our responsibilities and decision-making based on practices of listening and inclusion. Perhaps more than any of the other core practices that L'Arche has named for itself, the transformative mutual relationships of its guiding insight are most readily discerned in this practice of people with and without disabilities exercising responsibility and making decisions together, for their own lives, of course, but for their communities as well. The mutuality and co-creative partnership that Jim and I grew into in our friendship was very much rooted in these core values and practices. Our co-creation of a L'Arche home was a co-creation of the spaces and the rituals named in these core practices. We made decisions together with our housemates to do our best to co-create a home and community where all could flourish. And of course, we did really well some days and less so on others. When Eric Carter delivered the PYNE lecture here in 2017, he spoke about the dimensions of belonging that he had uncovered in his study. I was struck then by how he noted that belonging is fostered more by postures than place. It is more about relationships than programs, and it is more about ordinary gestures than extraordinary responses. The values and practices of L'Arche are precisely the way L'Arche is trying to cultivate the postures, relationships, and ordinary gestures of deep and radical belonging. The implications and imperatives of these values and practices, and perhaps most particularly this last one that touches on shared decision-making and authority, and thus participation, hold the potential of helping L'Arche to cultivate solidarity between people with and without intellectual disabilities. And this is another theological concept that I think L'Arche can help us expand our imagination around. Solidarity that cultivates a social matrix that includes people with and without disabilities in equal and interdependent participation holds great promise for moving us towards communities of belonging and flourishing. By building community centered on this sort of interdependent participation, we find what theologian Megan Clark calls, quote, the key for human rights and solidarity, end quote. According to Clark, belonging involves more than recognition of another's humanity. It requires recognition that on some level, we are in community together and are open to being changed and engaged by others. So here again, we're reminded of that guiding insight within the L'Arche Charter. Our relationships with each other change us. We all belong. Solidarity between people with and without disabilities, and indeed, genuine belonging, only become possible when we work towards relationships and communities that transform us in this manner. Here I want to take a turn from looking directly at the values and practices of L'Arche and move us on to some of the research I've done on allyships. The work of solidarity and the shifts in anthropological emphases from independence to interdependence and relationality also suggest action and advocacy. To be in relationships of solidarity with people with disabilities is necessarily going to mean we turn our attention toward the work of advocating alongside people with disabilities for the rights and the justice they seek in our ableist societies and systems. When I think about the deep relational work of L'Arche and the necessity of action and advocacy with my friends there, a helpful synthesis of these two aspects of mutual relationship is suggested to me in this notion of allyship. It's important to note that I am not just automatically an ally to my friends in L'Arche by virtue of that friendship. I'm not calling myself an ally here today. It's not something I can name for myself. It's something I need to actively work at and to continually learn about and grow into so that my actions might lead my friends to a recognition that I can act as a trusted ally in their quest for justice. So this presentation today, in many ways, reflects some of my learnings from my own attempt to practice allyship, to be a better and more helpful friend to my friends in L'Arche. And I'm going to start this part of my lecture with another quick anecdote. I've had the great opportunity over many years to learn from some of the colleagues of Dr. Wolf Wolfensberger. Many of you are perhaps familiar with his work. Dr. Wolfensberger's concept of social role valorization provides an important framework for understanding and counteracting the many ways people with disabilities are devalued and harmed within contemporary society. He was a staunch and early advocate for full community inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities. He was also a key part of the founding process for a L'Arche community in Syracuse, New York, where he taught at Syracuse University for many years. And that community is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. I wish we had more time to unpack some of Dr. Wolfensberger's work to see where it might fit into a conversation around allyship, but it's not quite the focus of my lecture today. I mention Wolfensberger because he once told me, when I was a young man just beginning in L'Arche and in my naivete, probably feeling pretty darn good about myself for making such a noble choice in life, he said if I really wanted to help people with intellectual disabilities, I should become a plumber. It took me by surprise to hear that, of course. And it was frankly a bit ego-deflating, which is, in hindsight, a very good thing, because that ego was inflated by my ableist, infected sense of altruism. I'm going to move to L'Arche and save the day. But Dr. Wolfensberger also planted the seed of a thought that I'm still trying to understand today. At the heart of this work for me, in L'Arche and in the research and writing I do, is an important question that I need to continually ask of myself. Does a guy like me, one who checks so many of the boxes of ability-based privilege, who conforms with relative ease to cultural norms of bodily and intellectual functioning, and as a white, cisgendered male, has access to so many other cultural norms associated with power and privilege, do I have any business getting up here and talking about disability? Do I have any business trying to get involved in the lives and communities of people with intellectual disabilities in L'Arche? It's one of the primary questions that Wolfensberger's exhortation to me to become a plumber has prompted down the years for me. What's the place of those of us without disabilities in the work of disability solidarity and justice and within disability community? I'll give you a moment to reflect on that question from whatever your own perspective is. And I invite you to bring it along with you throughout this part of the lecture. One of the ways I've tried to answer that question for myself is by thinking of ways the friendships of L'Arche, so important and good in and of themselves, can also be pathways to justice. The concept of the ally and the practice of allyships is one such way I've found some promise and pitfalls, which I'll touch on. The concept of allyships weaves together the friendships of L'Arche with the necessary aspects of providing competent care and advocacy and action. It provides a more comprehensive sense of what the mutuality in the relationships of L'Arche can look like. And for all of us, allyships make solidarity real and concrete and actionable. Acting as an ally is one practical way to be in a relationship of solidarity. I want to think about how we can deepen and develop the friendships of L'Arche and those friendships that you find yourself in your own ministry or educational setting, wherever you are, and turn those friendships towards solidarity and partnership in the work of counteracting ableism. I've been researching different models of allyship, and there are quite a few out there of varying detail and focus, and I want to share a few of the commonalities I find most valuable across some of those allyship models. Each model and book or article on allyship suggests any number of levels or stages or things that one can or should do to effectively practice allyship. One article I encountered on disability allyship somewhat early in my research and that I found particularly helpful is co-authored by a disability studies professor and one of her students who identifies as being physically disabled. It names 3 components of allyship from within the disability studies literature. The first is being aware of our own privileges. The second is taking action to work against ableism. And the third is taking action in partnership with disabled people and amplifying their voices. I'm going to borrow these 3 components to organize this part of my lecture. And let's just take them in order. To act as an ally means to become aware of our own privileges. As I named earlier, I'm aware that I have access to enormous privileges as a white, able-bodied male. If I hope to act effectively as an ally alongside my friends in L'Arche, and if I hope to stand before you all today speaking on the topic with any kind of relevance or legitimacy, it's all going to be in direct proportion to the degree to which I develop awareness of my own ability-based privilege within this ableist norms and systems of our society. Just as there are many varied models and definitions of allyship out there, there are also many different ways to define ableism. In each case, definitions of ableism address the prejudicial mindsets and discriminatory actions that have widespread negative impacts in the lives of people with disabilities. One way to think about ableism that I have come to favor is that offered by the scholar Fiona Kumari Campbell, a professor of ableism studies at the University of Dundee in Scotland. Campbell writes, as we can read on the slide, that ableism is, quote, a network of beliefs, processes, and practices that produces a particular kind of self and body that she calls the corporal standard. This is projected as the perfect, species-typical, and therefore essential and fully human. Disability, then, is cast as a diminished state of being human, For Campbell, the emphasis is on the way the social aspect of disability is the product of ableism and construed through the lens of ableism in a purely negative, tragic, and diminished light. She is concerned with acknowledging the diffuse nature of the term disability, troubling what we think we understand about disability, and highlighting ableism's function in inaugurating the norm, as she says. The fact that the essential core of ableism is the formation of a naturalized understanding of being fully human. I appreciate how this gets at the explicit negative impacts of ableism, as well as the way it actively and implicitly constructs what we construe as supposedly natural or unnatural ways of being human. Ableism is deeply entrenched, with clearly oppressive impacts, yet nearly invisible roots. It's the air we breathe, so to speak. When those of us who conform to the supposed corporal standard for being fully human attempt to take stock of our own privilege and the ableist systems that it gives rises to, it is important to recognize how that privilege is squarely built on top of this false understanding. Engaging with ability privilege, according to Krista Bialka and Danielle Morrow, as we can read on this slide, asks those of us who conform to ableist bodily and intellectual norms to, quote, think about the unearned benefits that they have been granted on account of their ability status, and to recognize the physical, emotional, social, academic, and attitudinal barriers that individuals with disabilities face, end quote. There has to be this recognition of these unearned benefits and the privilege and power that is afforded those who conform to these ableist norms. Practicing allyship entails this recognition first, and then this recognition must move us to action. Taking action to work against ableism as the second component necessary of acting as an ally will look different for each of us, depending on what our context is. When we consider the friendships of L'Arche and the ableist structures and systems that L'Arche is most impacted by, we need to take action at an internal level, as just noted in the need to understand ability-based privilege, but we also need to take action at the interpersonal level, the institutional level, and the wider systemic level. To take this component of allyship seriously means that as a friend to Jim and Judy, I must also become an activist alongside them and work together with them to change the systems and structures of power and privilege that continually work to deny people with disabilities their full rights. Herein lies one of the most often cited pitfalls of the practice of allyship. It is too often done in a performative manner. I call myself an ally, and then I go out about some well-meaning gestures of allyship that don't really develop relational solidarity or move towards action for justice. Without this action to deconstruct ableist power dynamics and systems of oppression, efforts to practice allyship will remain on that performative level and actually become counterproductive. And the third component of allyships that I want to share today is that whatever action we take as allies must be taken in partnership with disabled people and amplifying their voices. This clearly implies disability leadership in my mind. For L'Arche, we have often limited disability leadership to our spiritual and faith life, which is certainly not a bad thing in and of itself. However, we need to get better at listening and taking action with people with intellectual disabilities on the issues that they tell us most impact their lives. It's why Jim and the Boston North community are developing a vocational training and employment program. Jim and others have often cited the lack of meaningful employment available to people with intellectual disabilities. In churches and faith communities, there are often religious education programs and ministries for disabled people that do very good work. But how often are people with disabilities part of the leadership of that faith community? And do those ministries lead to actions of solidarity and justice an open space for the perspective and leadership of people with disabilities. Relatedly, in our seminaries and schools of theology and ministry, are programs and courses orienting students towards disability solidarity and justice? Are they open to people with intellectual disabilities? Are we preparing ministers and educators to truly listen to the disabled community and take the action that the disability community calls them to? I think these are crucial questions for faith leaders and educators. And towards this component of allyship that calls us to action in partnership, I want to amplify the perspective of some colleagues I have the real honor of working with in L'Arche. Our inclusive leadership group is 9 of us from several of our communities across the United States and some of our national staff at L'Arche USA. We've been working together for about 9 months, and our mandate is to develop accessible practices to ensure that people with intellectual disabilities in L'Arche across the United States can take on more leadership and decision-making roles at the local and national level. It's our attempt to make L'Arche more of a disability-led movement. Our work is deeply co-creational. This group recently developed a foundational set of values and practices for inclusive leadership in L'Arche, and they cluster around these 3 primary themes displayed on this slide. For this group, inclusive leadership honors the individual and the collective, acknowledging our attempt to live a communal life. It is leadership that works for positive change. The group continually comes back to the fact that it has to be action-oriented, not just talk. And it is leadership grounded in experience in daily life. It cannot remain theoretical, and it has to arise from the lived experience of people with intellectual disabilities in our community. One of the specific values named by this group when it's approaching this theme of working for positive change here is that of courage and boldness in our work for change, which harkens back to Easlin's note about risk from her PYNE lecture. Are we willing to risk understanding God more fully as we move towards full participation of people with disabilities? Our L'Arche Inclusive Leadership Group is willing to act with courage and boldness to take the theological and very real risk of action on behalf of justice and leadership for people with intellectual disabilities. And are those of us who hope to practice allyship alongside people with intellectual disabilities ready to act with the same courage and boldness that this group has put forth? If L'Arche has anything to offer those in faith communities or educational settings who take up the risk of action for justice, it is the wisdom that when we take action together, not only is it more sustainable, but it becomes co-creative and mutual and infused with the love of friendship. Thank you. Thanks, Woody. Thank you. Thanks to all of my friends from L'Arche. We have time just at tables here for a quick discussion with one another. And here's a question to prompt that discussion for just 5 minutes. What's one new idea growing in your heart and mind for how to become a more active and effective ally alongside people with disabilities in your specific context? Your faith community, your school setting, your workplace, or wherever else that may be. So 5 minutes together.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering what advice you might be able to offer, at least briefly, on how to approach making leadership more accessible to persons with disability, given whatever functional limitations they have.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately go to the notion of accessibility around like how we co-create strategy, for instance, something that we're working on right now with our inclusive leadership group. You know, so many of us are able to just kind of rattle through a strategic process or plan, And yet, if we really want to slow that down to the right pace and make it accessible, we need to create the time to do that and the resources to do that, and to invite people to that. And it's going to shift the way that leadership looks, right? For the better, for sure. So, is that getting at your, yeah.
I have a question from the audience, from the online audience. What are some specific ways a place like the CSTM or other schools of theology or seminaries might develop strong commitments to fostering allyships between people with and without disabilities?
Well, I mean, I immediately think of their presence in these places, right? Like, are we opening seminaries and schools of theology and ministry to people with disabilities? Is there accessibility for people of disabilities, no matter what kind of disability that might be, or especially people with intellectual disabilities? So I think of just presence. And then what's the coursework? I took a really great course with Mary Jo a few years ago that prompted a lot of these thoughts here at the Clough School of Theology and Ministry, but there could be more probably in places. There could be more courses, and then those courses could be universally designed so that people have access to those courses, to the information. And I think too of like co-teaching, right? I've got two of my co-teachers here with me today, and there's a lot of wisdom that our seminaries and schools of theology need from my friends in L'Arche. So.
Thank you. I just want to let you know I'm doing the woodworking at Lod Barton, like down the basement, learn to fit all the chair. I tighten up 5 chair at the butter house and look good, and I'm doing that. I just want to let you know. We'll say a prayer for everybody around the world. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Woody.
Thank you, Tom, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Tom.
That you do us proud. As you work in that committee that's moving forward to deepen the participation, what do you imagine as the horizons for L'Arche? Like, what are the next steps? It sounds as if you're still evolving, developing, expanding, deepening, broadening. What do you see as the horizon?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I shared today, I think I see as a horizon, right? I think becoming a disability-led movement is important. And I think when we do that, we're going to learn a lot internally in L'Arche about how we want to be together and what kind of work we want to take on behalf of our friends to create more justice in the world. But I also think it orients us outwards in L'Arche, right? To partnerships, to disability justice, to activists and scholars working in that realm. So there's an internal and an external focus, I think, for us as we grow that. So I think there's a lot we have to offer the world, but there's definitely a lot we have to learn from especially disability justice scholars, activists.
Can people with disabilities come here and take theological classes?
Deb, it's a great question. You can do that. And I know for sure that there are plenty of professors here who would make that happen and would be really excellent professors. And I know you would bring a lot to the conversation, and people would learn a lot from you. And yet there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that you're able to come into a classroom here, Deb, and that it's a place that you feel welcome and are able to exercise your gifts, I think. So it's a yes, and there's work to be done. So thanks for asking that question, Deb.
Tom Murphy,
Yes.
I'm interested in about the classes here.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I'm glad you're here, and you're here. We're doing it.
I would
We're
love-
at Boston College.
I would love to be in one of the classes.
Yeah, I would love that for you too.
Yeah.
I'm just, in Massachusetts, does DDS fund large houses?
Yes.
That's a funding
Yep.
source?
Yep, that's a major funding source, and then, of course, it only makes up a percentage of the budget, so there's a lot of fundraising and grant writing that has to happen on top of it.
And so how could clients access the program if you have a client somebody who wants to move into one of your houses? What's the procedure with?
Yeah.
DDS approval, Mass Health, how does that?
Yep, both of those, DDS approval, the DDS here in Massachusetts, the Department of Developmental Services, they often are a conduit for people to find out about l'Arche. People often have found out about l'Arche on their own, though, and they come and visit, and they maintain a relationship for a long time, and that can often develop into them or their loved one moving into l'Arche. So there's a few different ways it can happen. But it's all, I talked a lot about relationship today, right? It all goes back to relationship, and is the relationship something that the person wants to move into? Are we able to create a relationship in which this person will flourish? So, yeah, it's not too often that the l'Arche community grows very much. So, yeah. Yep.
Thanks, Tom. It's nice to see you again. My name is Maddie.
Hi, Maddie.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. A question was coming up for me about listening and formation to listen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts or insights about how you, through your experience at l'Arche, have been formed to listen better to the people around you.
It's a great question. Thank you for that. Have I always been a good listener? Oh, yeah, really? Oh. All right, thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. I don't know about it, though. Yeah. We've had our run-ins over the years, too, haven't we? Yeah. Well, goodness, I mean, we do a lot of formation in l'Arche, right? And a lot of that formation is really helping people who, like me, who came in with this do-gooder spirit, right? How do we help people to come into l'Arche with that, which is wonderful energy? How do we translate that, though, into the relationship of solidarity, the relationship that puts our friends with disabilities first? And that takes some time, and it's often a rather painful process. I can attest to myself, those ableist assumptions and mindsets are deeply entrenched, and they take a lot of uprooting. So the practices of relationship that the core practices of l'Arche, there's no rocket science in them, right? They're just sitting around the table together. They're praying together. They're doing the simple things of life, but it's in those moments that you tune in. You learn how to develop that listening, I think. So.
All right. Please join me in thanking Tom, our speaker.
Thank you.